All right, folks, we're broadcasting now. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the National American Indian Court Judges Association Rapid Response Webinar Series. Today we're going to talk about technology and e-filing and the most effective ways to use technology while a lot of us are either working and sheltering from home or trying to work and conduct hearings and business remotely. We are still allowing participants into the room right now, so we'll just give them another minute and then we'll begin shortly. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I see that we have a lot of repeat attendees, so thank you so much for keeping us in mind and rejoining us. Today, a little roadmap here. For those of you that are new to us and to the Zoom webinar format, you should have a toolbar on the bottom here that has a few buttons that will be relevant to your participation. So the first one is going to be the chat button. So go ahead and please press that chat button right now. You're going to have a column that pops up, and right there we'd love to hear from you. Let's say hello, let us know where you're joining us from. There's also going to be a Q&A button, so go ahead and pop that one out as well. And we know that this one is about technology and implementing technology in the courts and using technology with your teams. So we are anticipating some questions from you guys, so feel free to answer them there. My team and I are going to go ahead and keep a close watch on those questions that are coming in on the Q&A side, and then also through the webinar chat box as well. You will also have the ability to raise your hand. Feel free to raise your hand if you have, something that you want to say or something that you want raised, and we'll try to message you directly as well. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to our friends and our president, Richard Blake, to go ahead and give an introduction of the organizations involved. And then we're going to go ahead and move into our presentation on technology and e-filing. We'll also have a facilitated discussion at the very end. And then we're also going to present a few different pieces of software, different platforms that folks are using to stay connected, and that whether that's connecting individuals in your courts or connecting your teams and ensuring that you're still being able to work effectively. That being said, we'll go ahead and allow Richard to say hello on behalf of NAICJA. Richard.
Okay, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, I guess now. Welcome to the webinar. I wanted to first give acknowledgement to our partners, National Council of Juvenile Family Court Judges and KC Families, for their participation in co-facilitating and presenting on this matter that we have today. I also want to take time to acknowledge two tribal communities in the nation right now, the Navajo Nation and the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians, both having some exposures that have affected them. And I'm hopeful that with prayer and a lot of continued social distancing and work, that those communities will bounce back and that life will return for them. I'm again, Richard Blake. I'm the president of the organization. I wanted to also acknowledge our staff, Nikki, Elton, Ansley, and Rebecca, for the exceptional work that they are doing on getting these together and making certain that these issues that are on the forefront are being addressed, and that we have the forum and able to address them within our individual communities. Again, welcome. I look forward to the information. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to any of the contributing organizations, as I think that we all collectively will be able to answer any questions that you may have concerning this and any other matters that you may have in your communities. Again, welcome. Thank you, Nikki.
Thank you, Richard. And then Jack Trope, Senior Director of Casey Family Programs. Hold on, Jack, you are muted right now.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Nikki, and thank you, Judge Blake. As Judge Blake mentioned and Nikki mentioned, I'm Jack Trope with Casey Family Programs. I see from the chat room, I know some of you who are on the call, so welcome. For those of you who don't know us, we are a national nonprofit. We focus on improvements to child welfare systems across the country. We work in all 50 states and DC. I'm part of the Indian Child Welfare Unit. So we specifically work with tribes as well on issues like the Indian Child Welfare Act and Title 4E for tribes, things like that. And we know that tribal courts and tribal judges are critical for well, for tribes and for the child welfare systems in each of your tribes. We know the high quality work that you do and the challenges that you face. And so we're happy to have, we've been partnering with NAICJA now for several years to try to support tribal judges and to provide education in conjunction with NAICJA. And so we're very happy to be co-sponsoring these webinars for all of you as you deal with this unprecedented situation. And I will join with Judge Blake in passing along my hopes and best wishes to Navajo and Mississippi Band of Choctaw. We do have staff members working directly with Navajo on our staff who are Navajo themselves, and we've heard firsthand a lot of what's going on. So our thoughts and prayers are with you, and we are happy to be co-sponsoring this webinar. Thanks, Nikki.
Thank you, Jack. We really do appreciate everything. And I'm also going to defer some time to our partner, Joey Orduna Hastings. She's the CEO of NCJFCJ, and I'd love to allow her to have a few moments to welcome you all as well.
Thank you, Nikki and Judge Blake. I appreciate this opportunity to partner in this webinar on behalf of the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges. As some of you might know, the NCJFCJ is an 83-year-old judicial education and membership entity. We train judges and others throughout the country in state and tribal courts, especially through our strong partnership with Nikki and Judge Blake and the NAICJA Association in efforts to improve the state court system and tribal court system on behalf of children and families and victims. Today's webinar is especially important because between our organizations, we're gathering a lot of information and experiences from each of you while we're all trying to live in this temporary normal, I guess I'd say, and how we're managing technology and the new way of providing access to justice. And so we look forward to having this conversation with you and being a resource to you. The council, at the conclusion of this webinar, you'll see we do have a website that has gathered a number of materials and resources, including those from NAICJA, on information that may be of help to you. So I bring many good wishes and wishes for good health on behalf of our 75 employees and our board and all of our members to all of you. And I look forward to being a resource, but I wish you all much safety and health as we go forward from here. And thank you for making time to participate in this webinar today.
Thank you, Joey. And I am Nikki Borchardt Campbell. I'm the Executive Director of NAICJA. I am Paiute and Ute and originally from Cedar City, Utah, and I am joining you today from Colorado in my home office, here with my family where we are sheltering in place. And as Judge Blake, Jack, and Joey mentioned, this is really an unprecedented time. And a lot of our courts have really had little to no notice on how to adjust, how to transition from primarily in-court proceedings and the way of life and the types of process that you have become accustomed to really, either shutting down entirely or restricting your court access. We are understanding that there has been a little bit of a curve there, and the need for technology has become increasingly important, not only to administering justice and hearing things like video conference hearings or teleconference hearings, but also to maintain connection on a professional level and on personal levels. We've been working remotely for quite some time now, and we're hoping to also be able to share some tips for staying connected as a team, knowing that our court judges and our administrators and our court clerks really need to communicate effectively throughout this time, even though we are sheltering in place. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to our two presenters. We have Judge Meredith Brent and Judge Egan Walker with us today. Judge Meredith Brent is going to talk a little bit about technology and e-filing in the tribal court context. And Judge Walker is going to talk us through how he was able to transition from in-person hearings to using technology almost exclusively to hear criminal cases in Washoe County in Nevada. And we're hoping that we're going to be able to have a lot of discussion. There will be some polls as well, so make sure you're paying attention. We love your participation. And so that being said, I'm going to turn this over to Judge Brent and Judge Walker.
All right, I'm unmuted. Great. First thing done. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Hawaii. My name is Meredith Brent. I'm the Chief Justice of the Osage Nation Supreme Court. I'm a member of the Osage Nation of Oklahoma, and I've been its Chief Justice since about 2012. The Osage Nation, for those of you who do not know, is located in northeastern Oklahoma. We have about 21,000 members. And we operate under a constitution that we adopted in 2006, and it adopted a 3-branch system. So we have executive, legislative, and judicial. The Chief Justice is in charge of the administration of the entire judicial branch, and that consists of the trial court and the Supreme Court. I am the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, but we actually also have a Chief Judge who runs our trial court, and so we work in tandem when it comes to situations like this, where we really need to be mindful of how we're going to operate under these circumstances. Okay, next slide, please. There we go. So one of my heroes, Douglas Adams, for those of you who don't know who that is, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, or Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Technology is a word that describes something that doesn't work yet. I love this phrase only because it just constantly reminds me how much technology changes. And we're in this age where technology isn't just something that they build this program and the program does the thing it's supposed to do and then they leave it alone. They just keep adding on features, whether or not we want them, whether or not we need them. And then suddenly it's grown beyond what we originally thought. With email, we just thought, oh, we're just going to send email and get email. And now it's tied to our calendars, it's tied to our phones. It's in the cloud, it is all over the place. So technology's become so ubiquitous, and I think that's really key when we're dealing with situations like this, where we are all apart from each other, and yet we still have business to conduct. So I embrace technology, but I plan on continuing to use it and continuing to learn it and understand it until the robots rebel against us, and then after that, we'll probably have to figure out a different plan. Okay, next slide. Thank you. So I would love to say that there's no excuse for not allowing e-filing, but we all know that that's not the case. The reality is that location and access to technology can really impact whether something like e-filing is feasible. Broadband is a luxury. Satellite technology is expensive. Not everyone has access to a device or to a data plan. So, and people just don't trust technology. So, I mean, if you told me in January that Zoom bombing was a phrase, I would be like, that's hilarious. What are you talking about? So, so that's really, you know, when we deal with something like e-filing, we have to keep in mind some of these issues that are going to come up, and some of the sort of biases that we may have regarding technology that we have to overcome in some way or another. So this is just the overview on what I'm going to talk about. Okay, electronic filing. So for our purposes, I'm only going to be discussing the transmission of pleadings from a party to the court to file as part of a case record. I'm not going to cover filings, you know, how parties exchange filings between them, or how the court delivers filings or orders or other entries into the record to the parties. So that's all I'm just going to be covering in this, and I will try to be as clear and as brief about it. By way of background, the Osage courts adopted electronic filing by email in about 2013. So it's been part of our regular practice to accept e-filings consistent to that particular rule that was issued. And to this day, it's something that we consistently get. In fact, we just received an opening brief and an appeal, and it took them 9 emails to send it to us because apparently there were many, many attachments to the opening brief. So, so our clerks are very adept at handling electronic filing. Okay, so to keep you all interested, I've thrown in a couple of polls here. This is our first poll. And the first poll is just basically to gauge when did a majority of courts start accepting electronic files. Before COVID, after, or in response to COVID, you still accept filings, you just don't accept them electronically. The court's closed, you're not accepting filings at all, or none of the above. If you are a judge for more than one court, and I know that many of you are, just pick one answer and then feel free to share more information about the other courts in the chat section. There it is. Okay, so there's a poll that you can actually select. You don't have to put A, B, C, or D in the chat section. Just pick your favorite from the poll that's just been posted. And so we'll give everybody a chance to answer this poll. The more of you who answer, the more it will be appreciated. And I can't see who's actually responding and who's not, so I won't have to call any of you out for not responding. All right, so it looks like a majority of our courts had electronic filing in place before COVID, so that's very good news. We have about 1/3 of the response in response to COVID, a few who don't accept any filings, and a few who are closed, and none of the above. For whoever answered none of the above, feel free to share in the chat exactly what that is. That's so that's really interesting. I'm always interested in finding out, like, sort of what other solutions are out there that we just can't think of. And so this is why these types of webinars are so helpful. All right, let's move on to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, so the National Center for State Courts adopted standards for electronic filing back in 2003, and the Conference of State Court Administrators adopted a policy paper in 2005. So obviously this has been around for a while. Many states and tribes have standards for electronic filing. And so in reviewing each of those documents, I just noticed that there were just common elements that were constantly being reinforced as a part of the process. They can actually be broken down into 3 things, but I kind of broke it out a little bit just so that we can parse it out a little bit more. It's mainly accessibility, cost, which is sort of like accessibility, but accessibility, cost, and security. Those tend to be the main things. But accessibility means a lot of different things in the court system. And so I broke it down to be a little bit more specific so we don't get too wrapped up in accessibility as a general concept in terms of access to justice. Okay, so take a look at these. Right now, this is another poll, so you know, feel free to answer. What challenge does your court face with e-filing? Whether or not you have a system that's already in place or you've had concerns about allowing it at all. I'm interested in what people's concerns are, what challenges they may have. because if there's sort of a universal concern, then, you know, we can focus more on that. But otherwise, I'm just interested in seeing across the board, what challenges do our tribal courts face when they deal with e-filing? So please take a moment and answer the poll. Okay. That is very informative. A third of the people responding said employee ability to access remotely. That is great. And that's very telling, and equipment and software also very telling. And one of you said you have no problems. Who are you? That's excellent. Good job. There's always going to be an issue, but when the systems work, it works great. And I guess when it falls apart, it does so fabulously. So, you know, we're gonna sort of pick through these things. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so when we talk about availability, I'm actually talking about physical availability. Who physically needs to access this? And that's our court personnel, our attorneys and advocates, and their support staff, self-represented parties, service providers. And at first I thought, oh, it's just going to be court clerks and, you know, attorneys and support staff. But then it turns out that no, they have their admin support will file things on behalf of the attorney. We have self-represented parties that are trying to send us documents, service providers, you know, child support, child services, adult services, they're also going to be filing reports. And if they can't come to court, they still need a way to get these reports to the court. And so that's an option for them as well. All right, next slide, please. Okay, and along those lines, how to access it. And so in terms of thinking about sort of a universal standard, it's been that anyone with a device should be able to use e-filing. And right now, the big thing is if you can use your phone to e-file, then that's a pretty solid system right there. That's sort of like the basis of what we want to be able to do. So, you know, we looked at different types of platforms and different types of devices, and that is one of the challenges, is that you can't just limit it to people who only use Chrome or people who only use Windows or people who just use Macs. So that's sort of, and then there's also a lot of devices out there, a lot more than that are listed here. Those are just the main ones that I could think of off the top of my head. I did include fax, by the way. Let's not dismiss faxes. That is still there. It's still just scrapping to remain relevant. So do not dismiss faxes as a means to get documents to the court. Okay, next slide, please. Cost, again, is the big one. We've got, when I talk about proprietary systems, I mean systems like Full Court and Justware and all these self-contained third-party programs that have a great system in place, but they want you to pay for it. And, you know, sometimes it's a separate system that will interface with another existing system. So that's what I mean by proprietary systems. There's also web-based systems where we can upload things into the cloud, and typically expenses with that, you know, how much traffic is going in there, number of users. Email-based e-filing systems, it's more about technologically what you can achieve. So internet speed, attachment limits, number of users. And again, I am including faxes in this. It is still a viable way to deliver documents. And you know, I don't want to leave them out. So faxes are still there. So you need whatever it costs to do faxes these days. It's mostly done digitally rather than physically loading something in and calling a landline and hearing the beeps of the clicks while the document transmits, but it is still a mechanism to get documents to the court. Okay, next slide, please. Ease of use. Again, it's an accessibility issue, and it's got to be something that's understandable for all users at all levels. It has to be something that you can easily upload and file. The software to read and write documents for e-filing, it needs to be free or low cost. There's no point in having the system if it's not going to be usable, if it's going to cost somebody a lot of money to be able to get their filings to the court. Another feature is that they need to know if they did it right. You need to be able to set it up easily. You need to be able to train your users. And by users, I meant court staff. I probably should have been more specific. And the ability to get technical assistance. So someone who sets up a system for you and then says, okay, good luck. They're not really thinking enough ahead in terms of what kind of assistance might be needed. Okay, components, what the court needs. And this is just a running list of different facets of what an e-filing system might require. The main one, court rule or administrative order. This needs to be written down. Whatever system you have, it's got to be written down somewhere. And it doesn't have to be a 20-page, rule. It can be something that is fairly straightforward and basic. But it's got to make sure that you've got all the benchmarks in there in terms of, what you want a filing party to walk away knowing and what you need your court team members to do. So, and then I added the COVID-19 special, which is gloves, masks, disinfecting sprays, and wipes, secure area to quarantine hard copies, and I will get to that. Okay, and what the public needs. They need access to a device that can send email if you are using an email system. So this is one of the things that we talked about over and over again is not everybody has access to a computer. Before you could offer a workstation on site, but with the buildings closed, like ours is at Osage, you can't really have somebody come in and use a computer to do something. And so that's, one of the issues that we've come across is what kind of devices can be used for people who aren't allowed to come to the building. And, the public needs information on where they can do this, how they can do this. And again, court rule, administrative order, it's critical in letting the public know what the expectation is. So the idea is that e-filing should allow someone with a phone and a data plan or Wi-Fi to file documents. That's sort of the best way to know whether or not you've got a system that's fully accessible. All right, next one, please. All right, and unfortunately, I cannot speak to this in any sort of great detail, but money transactions, it's a regular part of our business that we do. We take filing fees, fines, payments for restitution or child support in some cases. And there has to be a way to process these transactions electronically. Some third-party programs have a feature that allows you to process payments. And some courts I discovered do allow some electronic transfers of funds. Almost all the rules that I looked at in my sample search required payments to be physically mailed in. That is what we require at Osage. And so that is something that you will have to figure out whether or not electronic payments are a viable option. Next slide, please. And it does tend to rely on technology and security. So in lieu of that, there's a discussion about waiving fees and fines, requiring fees and fines to be mailed, electronic payments, and then a mechanism to transmit payments to whoever the intended recipient is. And I'm particularly thinking about child support payments and restitution, where it's important that the money get to someone who is relying on that money. We had not really considered waiving filing fees in the past, and that is something that was kind of brought to the forefront when all of this started. Is this something that we can hold off on until the building is open again and we feel safe having people provide, currency? In our case, it's just money orders and cashier's checks. We don't accept personal checks or cash. So that's just one of the issues that we had to consider. Okay, next slide. Hey, it's a poll. Yay, we love these. How does your court accept payments? Okay, that is about what I expected, is that a majority require parties to mail in payments. Some have waived, which is great. And for those of you who accept payments electronically, feel free to share that information in chat. I think for those of us who don't really have a system in place, how you do it, the mechanics of that, I think would be really helpful information to share. So thank you everybody who's responding to these. A different system for payments, that's great. Again, if you've got another way to solve this issue, we'd love to hear it. The more creative solutions we can find to these types of challenges, the better. And then we have some none of the above, which I put that answer in there because, again, we don't have all the answers, and we're still just trying to figure out, you know, how these things are going to work as information constantly comes in and changes what we do. Okay, let's move on to our next slide, please. Okay, so remote access, and this was one of the responses. For those courts with staff working from home, there should be a way to access e-filing systems remotely. And it depends on what kind of system you have in place. We've got virtual private networks, which VPNs, which a lot of tribes do have. And so a lot of staff members are logging into the VPN and they're drawing, they're able to enter into whatever, you know, web portal or whatever interface is needed to process these new filings that come in. Sometimes there's a web-based login, and for those of you who use like Outlook webmail, that may be another way that you're getting emails in if you allow electronic filing via email. And then some of it's application-based. So there are some programs that actually have a web-based portal. And then there are others where they host their own login. And so sometimes the applications will just have you log in themselves. And again, this is all dependent on having an internet. It's all dependent on having the necessary technology and devices. And again, not everybody has, you know, has a desktop sitting at home that they can just hop on. Not everyone has the resources to get a laptop assigned to them so they can go home and work off their laptop. So that just ends up being the different ways that remote access can work. And I know that that was a big concern for a lot of people. So that is one of the things that you need to think about with e-filing. Okay, next file or next slide, please. All right, security, another big one. Security has a couple of different facets to it. We want to protect our parties and we want to preserve information for the record. And so one of the issues that we deal with the e-filing is making sure that whoever did file these documents was authorized to file them. There are so many ways to create fraudulent accounts, and you know, somebody could create meredithdren@gmail.com and then file a whole bunch of documents on my behalf. And so there's got to be a way to ensure that the filing party, that you can identify who the party is, and that you have a way to ensure that the party who did file was authorized to do so. And there's typically different ways of using that, and I will get into that later, but this is just more about identifying some of the issues that we will face. Next slide, please. All right, the next big security issue is the integrity of the filed documents. So you want to be able to ensure that the document that was filed is the document that you received. There are ways to intercept emails and then to pass on another document that may not be what that person originally filed. So that's a security issue. There's always corrupted files. Somebody could, unaware or fully aware, send you something that's corrupted, that can contain a virus or malware. And then the other issue is that these documents, and I say self-contained only in the sense that they do not provide links to outside sources. And there are actually a few court rules from some of the tribes that I reviewed where they were very clear that you cannot post a link. You cannot put a link to a document that you intend to rely on in your pleading, and that if you're going to rely on a document, it's got to be part of the pleading itself, or it has to be part of the record already. The other issue with security, thank you, secure access to the systems, you know, using unique IDs and passwords, pre-registration, working email address or phone. And then at the end, when I say a dedicated email address, that's typically for electronic filing by email, where instead of going to that individual team member's email, it's going to go to a generic email. In our case, I think it's courtfilings@oshnation-nsn.gov. So that's another secure issue. Our court rule actually requires that we have a valid email address so that we can actually respond to the person who filed and confirm whether or not what they filed was correct, or that they filed correctly, I should say. The last security issue is ownership. Who owns the data? Who controls it? Who controls access to the data? This one is huge. When you have self-contained networks, through third-party programs. Typically, it's negotiated that the organization owns the data and they get to decide who controls it. They decide who gets access to it. The further away you get from that, the more you have to pay attention to what the terms of service are. So ownership is a really huge issue. And obviously it's always important that these documents that are being shared, that it's very clear that the court controls this information. Okay, next one. Oh, here's a poll. Again, what e-filing system does your court use? A proprietary system, a web-based system, email, fax? You have something different, or you just don't do it at all? So feel free to answer. Okay, email, and okay, that tracks. Oh, and whoever has a different e-filing system, please feel free to share what that is. Email tended to be, in my research, the primary way that most tribal courts were allowing parties to electronically file documents. I did actually note there were a few tribes who actually used a third-party service, a third-party program, and so there was a process for that. And then we have none of the above. We do not use e-filing, and so that is still an answer, because that tells us, you know, what do we need to do? Is that something that can happen? Is there something preventing it? Or is this just an actual choice that was made that there are just too many issues with e-filing and we would just rather not deal with the headache? And I can completely understand that. Okay, our next slide is different methods, and I will go through these quickly because I kind of touched on all of them as we've moved along. So we'll go ahead and tackle, this is just sort of the little elements here and there that I note about these different types of methods. The first one, the proprietary system. Next slide, please. Thank you. They are expensive. So usually when people say, you know, what's the first step? My first step is get like $10,000, because that's, you know, these systems are very expensive. It's usually hosted by the software provider on their site, or it can be hosted on site by the organization on its own servers. They interface with existing case management software. Access is governed by the software. So whether or not a user can actually file something, they may have to pre-register, they may have to provide identifying information. They are closed systems. They are very automated. So they will simply accept or reject filings based on the parameters set by the software. It's usually part of a bigger system. It's not just e-filing, although there are a few programs out there that are just e-filing, and they're just these self-contained systems. They tend to be the most secure, only because it's, you know, these are proprietary systems, so they work very hard to make sure that they control how somebody can get into the system. And in those cases, you know, organizations typically maintain control of the data. Okay, so the next one, so I messed up. I actually put this in my notes. I messed up and I put web-based before email, even though the list said email. That was really bothering me, but I'd already turned in my slideshow. So we're gonna go with web-based next. It's a centralized repository for filings, and I saw that nobody is using this. It's still very, very new. It's very experimental, and there are so many ways that it could go wrong. And you can see, you know, some of the features of these. Usually the good news is they provide their own FAQs, their own instructional videos for public users. They can usually be accessed remotely. I think usually training is going to be a big element of it to make sure that everybody knows how to use it. And ownership is going to be an issue. You know, it's like with Facebook and Instagram, one change in the terms of service and all that stuff that we've been putting out there is no longer ours. So, so those are the types of systems that, like I said, very experimental. Right now, nobody's using it. So I think that's all I'm pretty much going to say about that. Okay, and here's the big one, email, which is what a majority of people use. And, you know, I just broke it down. You need an internet connection, a data plan. You need a device or a workstation. a dedicated outgoing email address only accessible by court staff. That tends to be one of the best ways to get email. For us, it was working with our IT department to have sort of a new email system set up. And for others, that may not necessarily be the case. So obviously, it just depends on what technology allows you to do. There's typically a limit in size of files, as I can attest by the 9 emails we got for one pleading. Organization usually maintains ownership of the data. They're pretty easy to set up. You need a few extra steps, though, if you're going to use e-filing, and that's something that includes being aware of your file types and sizes, making sure you have up-to-date antivirus software, making sure that only certain personnel can actually access it, and where you secure the files once they're emailed. Where do you store them? Do you just keep them all on Outlook? No, you should not keep them all on Outlook. You should find another way to store them, especially if they're very large files. Okay, next, please. All right, and fax, our good old friend fax. They just scan documents over a data line to the court. The good news about faxes, if it's done over the phone, you don't need an internet connection. So that is one of the beauties. If your internet goes down, you can probably still get faxes. So that's why fax is an unappreciated workhorse these days. So let's not leave that out. And it's really more about having the right technology, getting the fax line, or getting the electronic fax account. The quality of fax documents varies, as we have all seen from time to time in our use of faxes. And where the receiving machine is, it really should be in a secure location. If it's out on a public printer or a printer out in the hallway that a lot of other departments may have access to, it's not necessarily secure. And so there are some security issues to be considered with fax. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so these are things that have come up as we've rolled through, these electronic filing issues. Guys, ex parte communications are still prohibited. Electronic filing does not mean email the court clerk and say, hey, what do you think about this issue? Should I file this? Or give me the judge's email address, please, so I can contact the judge and get this motion filed. Those are real things that have happened. Still ex parte communication, still very much prohibited. So unless the judge says, yeah, go ahead and give them my phone number and email address, why? Don't do it. That information, we still need to make sure that we keep professional, appropriate boundaries between ourselves, between our court team members, and the public at large when it comes to their cases. What I noticed is, in allowing emails to happen where something is emailed directly to a court clerk's own professional email address, instead of sort of a generic court filings email address, it becomes, there's sort of an invitation for a dialogue that we don't really want to happen. So that's something to pay attention to. There are some things that cannot be e-filed. So we don't accept videos, for example, or we don't accept sound files. We don't accept JPEGs. It all has to be in a PDF format for us. Your mileage may vary, obviously, but those things still need to be delivered to the court. And so the information that is still rolling out is how long COVID might last on a surface. For plastic, I think it's 7 days. For paper, it's 3 days. So what you're going to need is just a little secure area somewhere in your facility, if you have people on site, where those things can be effectively quarantined. And they remain there for the 3-day period, for the 7-day period, before they are really handled. And that doesn't mean that they can't be acknowledged or that there can't be an alternative mechanism for processing them. But it does mean that we have to take that into consideration when hard copies of things do eventually get filed, which eventually they should be filed, although I did find a few court rules that stated that if you file it electronically, you don't need to send us a hard copy. And that's a great practice, especially in these times. So these simpler systems like email, you need a lot of extra steps. Not a lot, you need a few extra steps. You need working email addresses, you need antivirus software, and secure channels to transmit information. So security obviously just tends to be something to keep in mind. Next slide, please. All right, so best practices. Those of you have seen the cover sheets that you might have to file in other types of courts and state courts or federal courts. A simple form for a party to complete and submit with their filing that provides the case information and contact information for that party, the nature of the filing and the date. Usually these types of cover sheets will transmit all the information you need, and then they can do the attachments after that. We actually just require parties to provide the case number, the name, and then who they are and what they're filing. So in the body of the email itself. But again, you know, some practices might be worth revisiting. Instructional sheets, we discovered that bullet points and flowcharts go a very long way with the general public, with team members, with judges. We love us some bullet points and flowcharts. So if you can do these instructional sheets that show that, it just turns out that that saves a lot of guesswork. List resources for free apps, PDF makers, document creators, email programs, and where you can get free Wi-Fi or internet. Right now, all those places are closed. So free Wi-Fi and internet may not be available. From places that might usually offer it, there are some providers that are currently offering free Wi-Fi or free internet within their service area, but you have to do some homework to figure out whether or not that's something that's available where you're located. And let's see, as wide a net that you can cast to get this information out to people is a best practice. So it's not enough to put it on your website or post it on your door. Share it with other agencies, with partner agencies who are going to interact with a lot more people than the court might, especially legal aid offices where they might be able to get information. That's always helpful. And again, best practice, the user should be able to use any device to file a document. And by device, I mean communication device, not like a toaster or something, but I mean a phone, an iPad, a Chromebook, something. And best practices part 2. Next slide, please.
Meredith, we have
Yes.
a couple questions.
Sure.
When you're talking about using instructional sheets and bullet points and flowcharts, do you have any examples that you might be able to share? Or have you seen any examples?
We might actually have some examples. I can pull those up. But I mean, I can't share them right now, but yes, I can share with the organization. Yes.
Okay, fantastic. We'll go ahead and upload any of the examples that she shares with us.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, cool. Okay, best practices part 2. It's really important to send a confirmation to the sender or to the filing party, letting them know that they can that their filing was completed in some way. And it also tells them, especially, you know, like I said, 9 emails for 1 pleading, letting them know that email 4 didn't come through, or we only got part of the document for some reason. Especially when large amounts of data are being transmitted, it's really important to make sure the person gets that feedback from the court. Also, be picky about what you accept. Like I said, we only accept PDFs, but some courts may accept videos, they may accept sounds, they may accept JPEGs, photos. So obviously keep that in mind. PDFs tend to be the easiest to work with. They tend to compress into small files. So that's, you know, again, that's what works for us. Limit the size of filings. Most companies limit the size of attachments to 5 megabytes or less. I think I saw one that it was 3 megabytes or less. So obviously that's a conversation you need to have with your IT department. And unless you have a particular setup that turns text into emails, do not allow parties to text you photos of documents. We do have ways of allowing a party to take a photo, and that can turn into a PDF, and then that PDF can be emailed to the court clerk. But we've just found that it sets a very dangerous precedent to allow a party to take a photo of documents and then text them to the court clerk for filing. It ends up crossing a lot of lines that we are not comfortable crossing right now. Okay, next slide. So at the end of all this, what is your goal? There's got to be a way to measure whether or not this is being successful. Is it to increase compliance with court orders, participation by parties, prove that e-filing is a reliable way? Sometimes it's just to prove that, hey, you can do this, and it's not, you know, it's not going to compromise what we're trying to do with the court. court visibility, accessibility for the short term. So keep in mind what the purpose of e-filing is. A lot of our courts are still open and they're still trying to do business. And so we're just trying to find ways for them to be able to continue to do business. And different ways to sort of matrix what those measurements could be. If someone could, next slide, please. So if you can, try to track the ratio of hard copies into e-file documents. It's like for every 2 pleadings we have that were brought to the court, we have 8 pleadings that are being e-filed. So, developing that ratio to keep track of, how many people are taking advantage of this is helpful. Was there an increase in responses? Have you gotten, fewer default judgments as a result because somebody could actually respond and transmit that email rather than physically having to come to the court to file something? It helps to track the number of confirmed filings. So ones that were successful, it's like, oh, 99% of the filings that people sent to us, came through just fine. They weren't corrupted. We got the full filing. So sometimes it helps to invite surveys or short polls following a transaction, saying, was this easy for you? Do you have any questions? And then if accepting payments, track whether the ability to pay electronically has led to any sort of increases in compliance with court-ordered restitutions, fines, and payments. Sometimes just by making something available electronically, people will take advantage of it. Sometimes the act of coming into a court to file a check or to drop off a check, that's hard for a lot of people to do, especially if they work during business hours, and coming in afterwards isn't an option. Okay, so to summarize, your mileage is going to vary. There is no one best system. There are so many different ways that this could be done. And so I appreciate everyone who participated in the polls and shared some of the information about what their courts are doing. And obviously you want to take a system that best serves your community, take into account your circumstances, access to technology, security, and safety, which is really important as well, obviously. So those are sort of like the big rules right there. And the next slide are just some resources about free PDF makers. You don't have to get Adobe. It is expensive. It's a great program. I love working with Adobe, but it is an expensive program. The Reader is free, as most sites will tell you. And then there's also free document creators. So you don't have to have MS Word. You can use Google Docs, OpenOffice Writer. There's a couple of other, it should be LibreOffice Writer, not Officer Writer. So sorry for that typo. And there are some apps that turn photos into PDFs, which I mentioned earlier. So there's Adobe Scanner, Scanner Pro, PDF Element, ScanBot, and they all provide it for free. So that is something that if somebody says, well, I have my phone, I can take a photo of it, then they can actually use that to turn it into a PDF to send to you. So that is it for me. We're going to do our questions and comments at the end. So other than that, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Meredith. And as she mentioned, we are going to save our Q&As for the end. So if you have any additional questions, again, either hold on to them for the end or go ahead and type them in the Q&A box. Now I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Judge Egan Walker. He is the treasurer of the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges. National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, and he's also the 2nd Judicial District Court Judge for Washoe County.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Richard. I want you to know, Nikki and Judge Blake in particular, I really cherish the connections that we have with NAICJA and with all of you. The COVID pandemic has demonstrated on a worldwide basis how we're all connected, and we are really all in this together. So folks, I am a state court judge. I'm an elected judge in Washoe County. Washoe County is proudly named for the Washoe people, who are the original inhabitants of the county and continue to reside here to this day. I work in a jurisdiction that's about 480,000 people in our county. We have 16 different judges. Nikki, would you be kind enough to enable the share screen mode for me?
Judge, you're now a host.
All that power again. I just don't know what I'm going to do with it. What I'm going to do, folks, is share with you my computer screen. Can you see my screen, Nikki?
Yes.
All right, so folks, I'm gonna bring up just the internet and give you a view of my bench. This is the bench I'm privileged to work on. You'll see there are 15 judges. We're divided into a family division and a general jurisdiction division. I am one of the general jurisdiction judges. And the only real relevant point for that, for purposes of our conversation, is this. Like all of you, until March 16th of this year, I was conducting court at the courthouse, which is in the background of the screen here you see, in Department 7, transporting prisoners from the county jail that's about 10 miles away, hearing adult guardianship cases, and then hearing crossover youth cases, so children who are duly adjudicated in both the child welfare and juvenile justice system. I might mention as an aside, I'm privileged, particularly on that docket, to see a lot of my Native American kids from the Washoe, Paiute, Shoshone tribes that all reside locally. Until March 16th, we were sort of operating as usual. And then on March 16th, our chief judge, in concert with the Chief Justice of the Nevada Supreme Court, issued this administrative order. You'll see it's dated March 16th, 2020. I'm not going to go through all the legalese or language with you, but at the heart of it was this. It indicated that essential case types described as in custody criminal sentencings, bail motions, probation revocation hearings, arraignments, civil commitment cases, guardianships, juvenile delinquency, and abuse and neglect proceedings were the only proceedings that were going to occur at or around the courthouse. All jury trials, civil and criminal, were continued for 30 days. There are subsequent administrative orders that have now modified that. But overnight, our life changed. And it changed very dramatically and suddenly, as it has for all of you and for all of the people you serve, I know. And we had some lucky circumstances. So in the Second Judicial District Court, we're a mandatory e-filing court. We have been an e-filing court for almost 20 years, and we became mandatory e-filing across all case types about 3 years ago. E-filing is free to pro per litigants. It's a nominal cost. I believe it's $100 or $150 to lawyers and law firms. But e-filing has occurred across all case types. And I'm happy to say that pro per litigants in particular have really embraced e-filing. We were concerned about access to justice issues, but it turns out that almost everyone has a phone of some type, a smartphone, or access to a terminal, for example, at a public library or other places. And we were mandatory e-filers. And so we could quickly close down, as it were, in-person filings. But we struggled mightily, and we struggle really, you might, I would say, even to this day, to return to any sort of business as normal. On an average week prior to March 19th, I conducted about 60 hearings a week across the case types I've described. So adult criminal, adult guardianship, and crossover youth hearings. This week, I will conduct about 60 hearings, all by virtual means, which I'm proud of in the sense that we've come a long way, but it is challenging. So when you folks see the desktop screen you see right now, I'm going to change, well, I was going to show you, I'm just hooked up to a laptop. I'm hooked up to a laptop that was my personal laptop. I also have a laptop provided by the court. And that laptop is just connected to a large screen, which is my work surface, if you will. You have the privilege of seeing the bookcases in my living room, dining room. So I'm literally conducting court from my home, which happens to be in Sparks, but within Washoe County. And the platforms across which we work are Zoom. So in the same way that you see a Zoom conference this morning by webinar, we open a webinar meeting with the court. The panelists in the webinar become myself, the attorneys, parole and probation, the court clerk, the court reporter, and court staff. And so we have a webinar connected to all of the parties across the Zoom platform. I happen to use the Zoom applet. I've displayed the applet for you This is an applet you can download from the Zoom website that lets you schedule meetings, return to a meeting, or join or leave meetings as you desire. You see on my desktop now, this is again my desktop from my laptop at home, this VPN client property. So ForcePoint is one of many vendors that allows you to create a virtual personal network link to the courthouse. In this case, this view that you all see is actually my desktop at the courthouse 10 miles from where I'm sitting. So I'm literally connected virtually to the desktop in the courthouse. It meant, as a challenging circumstance, for example, our court administration was very concerned about the health and welfare of the citizens we serve and court staff. And it became problematic having people going in and out of the courthouse and recontaminating, if you will, the courthouse, be it court staff, bailiffs, or other people. And very quickly, the court realized that what we really needed was to turn all the computers on. So the judges' computers, the court clerk's computers, the judges' administrative assistants' computers, et cetera, and let people log in. And so what you just saw me do was use this ForcePoint virtual personal network and log in to my computer desktop sitting in the courthouse. And it's been on 24/7, 365 since March 16th. And so I communicate now with my court clerks and court staff by email. Usually, as an aside, the email I use is on the desktop here in my home, and it's through Office 365. If you use the Office 365 product, of course, there's a cost associated with it. It's you can buy Office 365 as an individual for about $80 a year. For a family, so up to 10 people, it's about $100 a year, and you can sync your Outlook calendar through Office 365 and access it from any device. So I can access it from my phone, I can access it from my laptop here at home, I can access it from my computer at court. But the email that I keep up most of the time, this is my personal email. You see Ms. Horsesheet, for example, and some of the survey information she had pushed to us is on my email. My email, my court email, and then my court calendar, including Department 7 is my department, is all available to me in this format. So what I'm doing, and I hope I'm not making it too confusing, is working across two desktops. My virtual desktop at the courthouse, and then the desktop here in my home. So what I do to conduct hearings, and this took a bit to stand up. We have a very, very, very good court IT department, and I'm very fortunate to work with them. And we had to stand up some technology in the sense of having a camera and a microphone for all of the court personnel, the court clerks, et cetera. But very quickly, we discovered, I had never used Zoom until March, but very quickly we discovered using a Zoom platform, I could remotely from home literally conduct court. So yesterday, for example, I have a Monday, Wednesday criminal calendar. As an aside, when I go back to the court website and show you the judges and calendars, you'll see I'm one of 9 general jurisdiction judges. One of the challenges we have is that to conduct hearings remotely, we only have 2 hearing rooms at the local jail. So Judge Connie Steinheimer and myself right now are conducting all of the in-custody criminal hearings in the 2nd Judicial District. And that happens Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of each week. I have Monday, Wednesday, Judge Steinheimer has Tuesday, Thursday. And I'm conducting between 40 and 50 arraignments, sentencings, other hearings each day. So yesterday, for example, if I show you my court calendar, if it'll come up, I had 23 matters on calendar yesterday. Today, you'll see these are matters, these requests for submission are matters that have been electronically filed and are coming to me for evaluation or signature of orders. But yesterday, unfortunately, the calendar isn't up. There were 23 matters. You can see my Monday calendar. is filled with arraignments, sentencings, probation revocations, reports on psychiatric evaluations, etc. And we did all of those hearings on Wednesday. Let me emphasize, those hearings only happened because of the remarkable professionals I work with, the court staff, my administrative assistant, and court administration. But for purposes of our discussion, what I wanted to show you is this. So we had all of those hearings yesterday. And if I go to my desktop, my virtual personal network linked to my desktop, you see that I have a folder just on the court O drive, we call it, a drive physically maintained at the court, at which the orders from the hearings yesterday or from hearings that we'll have populate. So what I'm going to do is virtually sign an order for all of you. This happens to be a guardianship order. All I've done, again, is access a particular drive at the courthouse by virtual means. I've opened the order in Adobe. Adobe is very expensive, as you heard the justice indicate from the Osage Nation, but it happens that we have the ability to pay for it, I'm thankful. And you can see that this order is prepared, if you will, for a deputy clerk's signature. Now, in the way of the world, of course, there is no signature line for the judge. So unfortunately, this order is not available for my signature. But if I go to my administrative assistant, or if I go to one of my court clerk's folders, there are a number of orders that are available, usually for signature. This proposed bail order, for example, was one of the hearings I conducted yesterday. And this was my order denying bail in a particular case. And in Adobe, there is a feature that allows me to fill and sign that order with a picture of my signature. It is literally just a GIF image of my signature in blue ink. I literally signed a document. My court IT took a picture of my signature. Yes, that is actually my signature. Please don't laugh too hard at me, folks, but that is actually what it looks like. I affix my signature to it in an encrypted, secure way. I sign it and save it in the court clerk's folder. And she, in this case, Ms. Kim Oates, is able to then electronically file that PDF using the court's case management system. We have a third-party case management system. It happens to be owned by Xerox. It's called Context. It's a very old legacy system. But again, remotely from my desktop, as can my staff, I can sign in to the court case management system. And if I wanted, I hesitate to say none of my staff trusts me to file anything in the case management system, so I'm not allowed to do it. But if I wanted to, I could actually file documents into this case management system, as my court clerk Kim will do with the document I just signed in front of all of you. And so this process of working remotely has become, with a number of growing pains, fairly seamless. You see that in the Microsoft Office environment, there's the Microsoft Teams feature. You can actually use Microsoft Teams if you purchased it to conduct multi-person hearings, much like we are on Zoom. I personally don't use it only because Zoom is so much easier. I take it aside and offer to all of you, we have not had issues with security. That's the word I was searching for on Zoom. There are some people who have asked, aren't we concerned with all the data we reveal and or push across Zoom with security? Candidly, we've had no issues with it in the second. It's funny because some people have some very strong biases about Zoom. The Clark County School District in Las Vegas, for example, had refused to use Zoom for quite a while because they had some early issues with Zoom. But for my purposes, it's been fairly seamless. So that's a walk in my shoes for a day, if you will. Again, a hearing, consider this a hearing, if you would, that we're having right now. the presentation of arguments in support of sentencing or bail motions or the conduct of an arraignment, for example. We can take witnesses, so we have a state constitution which gives victims of crime a constitutional right to make an allocution or a statement at the time of sentencing. And so we have witnesses appear. They are promoted from attendee to panelist and then sworn and give testimony. We can do a lot more than I thought we could do originally using the Zoom platform. And I'm very thankful for it, because otherwise, of course, we would have folks languishing in jail, or children languishing in foster care, or juveniles languishing in our juvenile detention facility, whom we otherwise might not be able to process. So I'm very thankful we've got the technology we've got, and it is not the most expensive, I might point out. The legacy third-party program, Contexti, we've had for almost 25 years, and we received an update for free because we've had it so long. The chief costs have been to buy the license through Zoom, which allows us to undertake a webinar. Each of those licenses is $300 a year, and right now we're buying, I think, 8 of those licenses. So there are some costs, but for the most part, we're using legacy equipment. And we just got lucky that we had some existing information. The final thing I wanted to share with all of you, though, is some of the challenges. So I pride myself on being a relatively good multitasker. Fortunately, my wife's in the other room, and you can't all hear her laughing out loud when I say that. But I like to think I'm a reasonably good multitasker. The Zoom platform, I must say, as a judge, has been a challenge for me. So right now, as I'm talking to all of you, the pane that I'm in happens to be at the middle top near the camera. So it looks reasonably well, as though I'm making eye contact with all of you. But sometimes the platforms will be in a very small thumbnail, or people will be moving around. So their camera will be moving around, or people will be challenged with the technology, and they'll be talking over one another or interrupting each other. Moreover, and an additional example, I've had the great privilege of being around Judge Blake many times in Washington, D.C., at conferences and others. I consider Judge Blake a friend. I know his facial characteristics fairly well, for example. If I didn't, I might not be able to read his body language and demeanor as well. And that is, of course, the case for many of the defendants whom I'm privileged to participate with. You know, we're doing arraignments and even category A felonies, so armed robberies, kidnapping, sexual assault cases. I think it's constitutionally adequate to do that across this platform. It's certainly not ideal, I must say. I'm very uncomfortable at times with the gravity of what we're doing by this platform. The other challenges are the technology. Many folks struggle to get on. I kind of chuckle to myself. I had a court session in guardianship world 2 weeks ago now, where there were 50 people on the Zoom meeting. And every time I would try to globally mute everyone, they would unmute themselves. And so they would be talking over one another or interrupting one another. There'd be cross conversations going on. Those are some of the challenges that we've had to struggle through. And so really, Nikki, that's the walk in my shoes, if you will, for a day I wanted to share with your participants. I want to cut my comments short to give some time for questions.
Absolutely. Joey, do you want to reserve these questions for the very end? We still have a good amount of, we have about another 15 minutes left, or should we address them now?
Nikki, I defer to you. You know, I think Judge Walker, the 2 questions that I posed to Judge Walker might be able to be answered fairly quickly, just to kind of address logistics issues with his staff.
Yeah.
So in terms of where the equipment came from, it was a mix of things. I have, I'll show you on my screen, I have supplied by the court a Surface, a laptop, if you will. The Surface has limited graphics capability. And when you're using this video platform, the more graphics capability you have, the better. I happen to have my own personal laptop. It's got a good graphics card, but we let the clerks take their laptops with them. We opened the courthouse and let them go one time and get their large screen monitors from the courthouse. So all the clerks have their large screen monitors from the courthouse at home. And it was a way to try and minimize the costs, both to the court and staff. Does that answer your question, Joey?
It does. But Judge, will you share how you prepare with your staff for court and the hearings? And do you have regular meetings, or what type of interaction does that entail?
Well, it's so difficult, isn't it, for all of us as social animals to be disconnected. You know, typically when I see Nikki, for example, I may give her a hug, or Richard and I will share a hug to greet one another, right, in human ways, to have some contact. It's been very difficult, candidly, for me, and I think for staff, to not have that contact or make that connection. We have staff meetings twice a day in my department, so morning and evening, to just check in, to share information, etc. But in terms of the preparation, the good news is I am completely paperless. So all of the court files I use, if I go back to share screen here, all of the court files I use for court, I'll have to connect again to my remote desktop, are contained on the court servers. And so I have documents I call binders that are nothing but PDF images of the entire case file in each case. So for example, you see criminal. If I go to the informations that were filed, this is coming up now for Monday. These are just PDFs of the informations that have been lodged against each of these defendants. And so in terms of preparation, I do it remotely, and then we discuss the calendars in advance of the calendars the day or evening before. Does that answer your question, Joey?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you,
You're
Judge.
welcome.
And we have a few other questions. And we'll go ahead and save those for the end. Also, for those of you, if you have any additional questions for Judge Trent or Judge Walker, feel free to go ahead and either put them in the chat or in the Q&A right now. I am going to just quickly close us out with a quick discussion about staying connected with your own team and your own community. And Judge Walker talked in depth about how his court uses Zoom. And we are all currently on the Zoom webinar platform as well. And this is the primary platform that NAICJA uses for not only our board of directors, but for our daily staff meetings. So this particular platform is fairly simple to use, and that's one of the reasons why we went with it. Of the tech options that we've listed here for staying connected, it is by far one of the easiest. So we had used GoToMeeting for about 3 to 4 years. The video function, it's a little bit harder to navigate. GoToMeeting is still, fairly user-friendly, but with regard to Zoom, you've got some big buttons on the bottom. It's easy to share information, and the learning curve for our team members and also for our judges has been pretty painless. So there isn't a large amount of training that needed to happen on either end to get folks to be able to share their cameras, to be able to share documents. Most people can generally figure things out on their own. And that's even with, judges who were very, I'm trying to think of a nice way to say this. Judges who have a difficult time with technology or who are afraid of technology. And so we've been able to get those judges online to share their cameras, to share their documents with us. And, we've all been very proud of them for being able to, get through that threshold. So Zoom has been our favorite by far. My husband is an attorney, and he recently had oral arguments in a federal district court, and the court used one of the Cisco systems. He said that that was also fairly easy to use, but he and all the attorneys and other teams went and did test runs to video into their hearing a few days before. That is one option. I just mentioned GoToMeeting as well. We used that for several years. It's not as user-friendly, but it is definitely one of the options for being able to either connect teams or to even do things like video conferencing and teleconferencing hearings and arguments. So I'm just going to take a quick step back. One of the things that Judge Drent mentioned is the use of technology is really going to be dependent on your internet access and your connectivity. And that goes without saying that if you don't have a great internet connection, you likely aren't going to be able to have some clear communication either through video conferencing. And so that being said, you might need to rely on teleconferencing and telephonic hearings. With the case of my husband and his oral argument, there were attorneys in large metro areas. He chose to go into his office because they were hardwired into the internet. There were DOJ attorneys in Washington, D.C. and Denver. And at the time, Denver and our area, we were having a blizzard. And the DOJ attorneys' connections started to go out. So that really affected the connectivity, and the judges in the case asked the attorneys to hang up their video call and to teleconference in. So even in the best types of scenarios where you think you might have really excellent connectivity and access to internet, that you are still going to run into those issues if there is something that might be interrupting, your Wi-Fi. I conduct our webinars here from our home office because I am right next to the router. So those are the types of considerations you want to have. So if you don't have reliable internet access, if you don't have that connectivity, that's when you need to bump back and say, okay, we just need to go back to telephonic hearings, or you need to call in for this. We've listed a few other things here as well. I want to leave some time for the Q&As. The FaceTime and being able to, chat through, your telephones. Those are always options for teams. The security is, obviously a little bit trickier there, but, the team and I would FaceTime occasionally if needed. There's also, I'm going to skip Teams really quickly, but Google Hangouts. There have been meetings and folks who are using Google Hangouts not only to conduct hearings, but also to connect, children and families through this time. Judge Walker had mentioned that, we still have a lot of child welfare cases going on. There's still issues related to custody and visitation. There are a lot of shelter-in-place orders out there. So, a lot of these, even if security isn't the strongest on some of these, you can still use those to connect people and to connect your team. Adobe Connect, I know National Council uses the Adobe Connect webinar system. That platform, as we mentioned earlier, across most Adobe products is a little expensive. It's on the expensive side. I do know that if you are an NPO, any of you folks who are nonprofits, you can look at TechSoup and see if it's a website that offers reduced fees for certain licenses to not only these, what we've listed here, from Zoom to Adobe to Microsoft, but you have access to a variety of different types of software that nonprofits use. So if you are a part of a nonprofit, you might want to check that out. Also, look and see if they have government pricing. I know Microsoft does. And so see what the requirements are to see if you can get some reduced fees in that regard. And lastly, we're saving Microsoft Teams. It's a part of the Office 365 package. Judge Walker mentioned that his team uses it. My team is about to experiment with it only because it has the availability to allow video conferencing within the Teams software itself. You can access it from any internet browser. But it also has connectivity with Zoom, and so it interfaces with a variety of different pieces of software. So it's really sophisticated in that regard, but it's also really secure. There's privacy and there's some extra layers of security there. So if you and your team are thinking about using this, or you and your court are thinking about using this, I suggest you go to the Microsoft page and take a look at that. My husband's firm uses Microsoft Teams, and he conducts a good amount of his meetings through video conferencing right here through the Microsoft Teams software. And in addition to things like just video conferencing, he can live chat with his team through chat box. Those are all saved in there. And it's also, it gives you the ability to manage various projects right in the Teams application. So in the past, our team has used things like Asana and other project management software, and that's what's appealing about Teams for us. And if I have any other feedback in the future, I'll let you know. But so far, my husband's firm wholly recommends Microsoft Teams. So if you and your group, your judges, your court clerks are looking for a way to coordinate your work, number one, but also to stay connected, Microsoft Teams is a good option. But again, like we mentioned, we also really love Zoom, my staff and I, and they have implemented and built in a lot more security options to make sure that things are secure, chats are encrypted, and they make sure that things like webinars are password enabled, and that you can allow people to be in a room before you go through and let everybody into your meeting. So that being said, if you have any additional questions, please feel free to email me directly about some of these tech things. My team, we have some opinions about the technology and the software. Right now, we're going to go ahead and go through the existing Q&As. I know we definitely have a few more minutes here. It looks like some of them were answered in the text box. Let's see. I know this question was asked of Judge Walker, but Judge Drent, with regard to preparing for e-hearings or video or teleconference hearings, are you preparing any differently than you would for an in-person hearing?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Yes. Right now, we don't have video conference capability over at Osage Nation, so we are doing them telephonically, and that requires the judge. Everybody's off-site. We have court clerks who are rotating shifts. We've got our court administrator who's on site throughout the day, but then we've got our trial court clerks who are rotating. And so whichever trial court clerk is available will go ahead and prepare the courtroom as if there's going to be in-person hearing, but instead they will just conference everybody in on a conference line and turn on the recorder, and then they will take notes. They will generate orders that may be needed for the judge, and that's how they manage to get things done for telephonic hearings.
All right, fantastic. Richard, I have been with you at several events when you have been conducting telephonic hearings. Do you have any feedback or any suggestions on things like, conduct either writing or signing orders? Did we lose Richard? I think we may have lost Richard, but we have equipped Judge Blake with an iPad Pro, and I know his courts have equipped him with laptops. So just for purposes of needing to have things signed electronically, the NAICJA staff and our judges will often use Adobe Acrobat. We have Adobe Acrobat Pro where we can send documents out for signature. Richard has his electronic signature uploaded. I have mine as well. And the other thing that has been helpful and useful is there's a few different pieces of software where you can specifically send things out for signature. So we can go ahead and try to list those. We are going to upload it onto our webpage if it's not already there, but it's a resource that the Administration for Children and Families put together on low or no cost technology options. I was looking for the link so that I could go ahead and just copy and paste it into the chat box, but we have a PDF here, and it basically lists every single, not every single, but a good amount of low or no cost tech options, how and where to download them, the cost, if there's any costs, and then also any additional information on them, whether or not they're video messaging apps, telephone messaging apps, and basically its capabilities. And it is just a straightforward list, like an actual list of bullet points. There's also a little bit at the bottom of this resource that provides some information on some free internet. So for those folks who might be in more urban areas or areas that have the availability to access internet and not need, unlike, you know, for example, the middle of Navajo Nation where it's difficult to get any type of connection, there are some free Wi-Fi and internet connections here, and with some links and information. So we'll make sure to get that loaded onto our pandemic resource page. As you saw from the previous slide, National Council also has some COVID-19 resources available. Our friends at the Tribal Law and Policy Institute have a pandemic resource page available, and I believe that they have some additional resources on there for working with teams and working remotely. So we encourage you to check out all of these resources. National Center for State Courts has on their COVID-19 page also some tech resources on conducting hearings remotely, and that might list some other helpful tools for those of you judges and of course our court staff who are trying to ensure that our courts are still running during this pandemic. And so that being said, if you have any additional questions, you know, always feel free to email us. Even though we are first and foremost a membership association for tribal court judges, and of course with National Council for our tribal and state court judges, through our joint membership, we are also both training and technical assistance providers. We have the ability to provide a lot of training, technical assistance and support related to operations. That is, you know, really one of the reasons why we have chosen to do these rapid response webinars, knowing that there are a lot of unanswered questions out there. There are a lot of questions that have never been asked before because, you know, we've never had to live and survive through a pandemic while still trying to take care of our communities and our families, and trying to balance that with the health and safety of our court judges and our court staff. So feel free to explore our pages, our web pages. We just launched a new organized page. We're going to continue to improve on our web page. You could either access it at www.NAICJA.org or wildapricot.NAICJA.org. We look forward to continuing to talk with you all and understanding what's going on from the front lines of your courts, and to continue and even begin the discussion of what types of considerations need to happen as we're looking towards reopening our courts. And that's the next step. We're currently doing research on this, but we absolutely cannot do it without your participation and your feedback, and to have both our tribal court judges and court staff and our state court judges helping us inform that type of training. So please stay connected with us, and next week we are going to have another webinar this same time, same day, and next week we're going to be looking at a little bit more of some issues related to criminal dockets and criminal hearings, and maybe even delving into some of those due process issues for the individuals. So thank you so much for your time. And if any of our other panelists and anybody else on the line wants to say goodbye, I'm going to go ahead and let them do that. But we're just so thankful to have you join us every week. Please stay safe, stay healthy. If you're sheltering in place and you're going a little crazy, you know, email any of the NAICJA staff. We love video conferencing. Just ask any of the judges who have joined us on any of our daily staff huddles. So thank you so much for your time. And if anybody on the panel wants to say goodbye, I'll go ahead and allow them to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for some excellent presentations.
Thank you so much for letting me join.
Yes, thank you for inviting me, and thank you everyone for participating and sharing.
Thank you for having the NCJFCJ, and we look forward to providing any support we can. Thank you, Nikki and Judge Blake. Really appreciate it. Great presentations to both judges.
Yes, thank you to our panelists. We really appreciate you volunteering and taking the time to address our membership and our friends. And on behalf of the NAICJA Board of Directors, the NAICJA Steering Committee, and my staff, thank you for joining us. See you next week.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.